Tell here with the best blow-by-blow man of my lifetime, certainly Hall of Famer Jim Lampley. You guys, of course, love Jim on HBO. Now calling the fight Canelo versus Berlanga on PPV.com alongside Chris Algieri, Dan Canobio, Dan Rafael, and some other notables. Jim, thanks for your time, man. And let's get started. You've been back nearly a year now, starting with Canelo's fight with Jermell Charlo. Now he's fighting Berlanga. Have you enjoyed your first year back? Do you enjoy all of the dozens of YouTube channels coming up to you? Many of us asking some of the same questions, but have you been enjoying your fight weeks and your return to the sport?
Well, the business world of boxing becomes increasingly a complex crazy quilt with countervailing forces, piercing right, left, up, down, et cetera, et cetera. Canelo has a variety of different options, and he has chosen a fight which is not the fight that most of the public seemed to want to see. It feels to the ringside expert, I don't necessarily include myself in that category, but we'll go with it for the purposes of the Zoom today. It feels to the ringside expert as though this is perfunctory. That the headline is not that he is fighting Edgar Berlanga. It's that he's not fighting David Benavidez. He's not fighting David Morrell. He's not fighting the smaller but ambitious Terrence Crawford. He's fighting somebody whom almost nobody I know sees as a viable threat to beat him. So it looks like a placeholder. It looks like a moneymaker. But to a certain degree, it's still must see because it's Canelo, and he's the number one attraction in the sport, certainly in this hemisphere.
Well, you touched on some of what I'm going to ask here already in that statement, but there's kind of two different trains of thought as it pertains to Canelo right now. One of them is, look, he's one of the few guys that still draws in North America and moves the needle. He's not selling out to the Saudis. He's one of the guys that still is keeping the sport afloat, at least in this hemisphere. And then the other thought that he's hurting the ecosystem. He's hurting the sport by not fighting David Benavidez or even, like you said, a smaller pound for pound king in Terrence Crawford. Where do you lie in that? What do you think is the truth there about what Canelo's doing in boxing?
He's fighting for his place in history at this point. He's fighting for, I think, the ultimate goal, if he were to honestly identify it, at least a chance to be seen by many Mexican fight fans, and in his hope, most Mexican fight fans, as the greatest Mexican fighter ever in the sport. And again, to choose to fight Edgar Berlanga at this particular moment is not a predictive step forward toward getting to that goal. Beating Edgar Berlanga, in the eyes of most ringside experts, will do absolutely nothing to enhance Canelo's credentials toward the goal of being seen as a higher impact fighter than Julio Cesar Chavez or any of the other great Mexican fighters with whose names he's now competing, Salvador Sanchez, various others. So I think that it's a time of year at which he is supposed to be fighting. There are no platforms or vendors who have dealt with him in the past or who are dealing with him now who would back away and say, no, we're not going to program that fight. We're not going to go along with your inclinations at this moment. The natural business response of all the organisms in the sport is to say he's Canelo. And up to this moment, he still gets what he wants. But again, this is not something that excites the knowledgeable fight fan and creates any sort of suspense or uncertainty as to whether Canelo can win. Everybody thinks Canelo will win the fight.
Does it mess up the ecosystem or the progression of the sport a little bit when he doesn't pull a De La Hoya and say, I'll fight Shane Mosley, even though he's a lot smaller draw than I am and all that. Yeah, does it? Kind of the same question again. I apologize, but again, does it hurt the ecosystem of boxing, or he's all we got left? So just shut it.
It's not a positive and it's not a huge negative. It's not a huge negative because Canelo is fighting and the audience wants to see him fight. Virtually every big star in the history of the sport has been allowed moments like this when they did not reach for the highest possible goal.
Right.
But again, he's getting up in age. He's fighting for his place in history. He has money. He has status. He seems to have already reached most of the logical goals. The remaining logical goal is to try to be seen as the greatest Mexican fighter ever. He's not going to get to that goal by fighting people like Edgar Berlanga.
What do you make of Berlanga? Do you think that, and what are the chances that a competitive fight breaks out as opposed to the spectacular showing he's expecting to have against Edgar Berlanga and Canelo?
He must have a spectacular showing against Edgar Berlanga, or else this is failed enterprise. If he goes in against Edgar Berlanga and the fight goes the distance and he wins a clear decision, that won't satisfy the audience. If he goes in and knocks out Edgar Berlanga in 4 or 5 rounds, that helps. That will be another positive addition to the resume, but also to a certain degree, that's what is expected. 10th round knockout, that's what's expected. But the bottom line is he's not fighting David Noel or Morel. He's not fighting David Benavidez. He's not fighting Terrence Crawford. He's not fighting any of the people who would have ranked above Berlanga on the opponent scale. And, it's curious to me that that's the choice he made.
What do you expect from Edgar Berlanga in this fight, Jim?
Well, I expect a spirited effort from Edgar Berlanga in this fight, and I expect him to try to use the tools he has, basically straightforward, predictable boxing punching power, not capably disguised by nuance or variety or all of the more sophisticated ways that a puncher sets up his work. In his first 16 first-round knockouts that began his career, an extremely eye-catching accomplishment, but eye-catching because of the sheer information of it, 16 first-round knockouts in a row. And once you get past that and begin to analyze, most boxing experts come to the conclusion, matchmaking, skilled matchmaking, effective matchmaking. He fought the opponents against whom he could have the possibility of getting first-round knockouts, and he got them, but that doesn't put him in Canelo's class.
He keeps saying a reason why he'll win this upset is his IQ. He feels that people are quick to point out his power and overlook his skills and IQ. Is he deluding himself thinking he can think with Canelo Alvarez, and is he just best served trying to impose himself on Canelo Alvarez? What do you make of Berlanga's comments that he thinks his IQ will win him this fight?
Well, most ringside experts, myself included, go to the he's deluding himself platform on that one. But, again, let's say Berlanga makes this go 12 rounds, wins some of the rounds, effectively competes against Canelo, but loses a decision. I think in Berlanga's world, that's a huge win. And in Canelo's world, that's a decisive loss. Again, Canelo has put himself in a position where anything other than a middle round knockout built on his skill and remaining power is going to be a disappointment.
Well, should he win this fight, as he, like you said, is expected to do, and not just win, but look great, but what's he eventually going to settle on? Do you think, because there's only so many Berlanga type fights even he can probably kind of get away with. Who do you think he's going to settle in on that the public really wants to see eventually?
Well, we now know, again, how stubborn Canelo is,
Yeah.
how self-determined he is, how unmoved by media influence or fan sentiment that he is. He makes his own choice. He builds his own career. At the end of the day, that has served him tremendously well. So, he's within his position as the number one dollar for dollar fighter in the world. He has the right to make this kind of choice and incur whatever audience displeasure or media disapproval is going to come as the result of it. So far, from what I've seen, it's audience displeasure, it's media disapproval, it's the usual fan base turnout and economic return of a Canelo fight. When you're in this position, as Larry Merchant used to say, just win this and go on to the next one. He'll get a pass for this, particularly if he gets the middle to late round skill-based knockout that I would expect him to get.
Who do you think, more so than any other fighter you covered on HBO, set this precedent that Canelo's following? The self-determination. I do what I want, regardless of outside sentiment. Was it Ray Leonard, in the 80s that kind of did that, putting off the Marvin Hagler fight? Was it Floyd Mayweather? Was it Oscar in some way? Roy Jones? Who do you feel like set the precedent that Canelo has followed the most?
Every one of those and 20 others that I could name from boxing history. Very, very, very few, and I'm not sure which great fighters went out and sought the best opponent every time they went into the ring.
Right.
Logic tells you that, in order to sustain a long career and maximize your chance of succeeding at the highest level, every once in a while, you're going to take a small vacation and, stay in the gym, train, stay in the best shape you can be in, go in and fight to win, but accept the fact that you're not going to get huge credit from the audience for this particular outing. There will be other fights down the road where he can continue to burnish it or embellish his Hall of Fame credentials. And the audience hopes that those fights include, to repeat what I've said before, David Benavidez, David Morrell, if he can keep winning and look a little bit more spectacular than he did in his last outing, and Terence Crawford, if Canelo accepts Crawford's ambition to come up to 168 pounds.
Which of those three names do you think is most likely to actually see the ring with Canelo Alvarez?
Wow. I haven't spoken to Canelo about it. I mean, it's 100% clear to me that he's stubborn enough that the more the audience demands Benavidez, the less likely it is that it's going to be Benavidez.
Right.
And the audience isn't really at this moment demanding Morrell because he looked pedestrian on the undercard in which he last appeared in Los Angeles. And Crawford, sure. I think it's very interesting because Terence has accomplished everything he said he could accomplish, and he has moved up in weight effectively. But 154 up to 168 at this point feels like a bridge too far. On the other hand, he has made himself into a highly recognizable name, and maybe Canelo goes in that direction by way of keeping his connection to the pound for pound rankings. But it's a hard question to answer because you and I are not in his mind, and he is very much his own person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And in answer to your question, like I say, you said, which of those fighters, was it De La Hoya, was it Mayweather, was it Sugar Ray Leonard, et cetera, et cetera? It was all of them.
Yeah.
The whole
they all handed the baton
about that for a long period of time.
Right. They handed the baton one to another, and he's the guy holding the baton right now.
Correct.
Right.
100%. And he's earned the baton.
Right.
And you can't go out and argue that he doesn't deserve the baton. He
Right.
is the number one dollar for dollar fighter in the world. He is the guy that you have to fight if you want to make the biggest paycheck. And he's using that, dangling that as a way of frustrating these other guys.
Yeah, and to his credit, still pretty goddamn good as he showed against Jaime Munguia in May. He's still pretty good too. So that counts for something. But
Well, I thought he looked really good in the closing rounds against Munguia.
mhm,
And I thought Munguia was a plausible challenge and a credible opponent.
yeah.
And I did not think Munguia was going to win the fight, but I thought he would provide some moments, and he did. And most of all, he provided the evidence that Canelo continues to have, by my lights, the best punch resistance in the sport, the best ability to take a punch, brush it off, go past it, keep fighting in the way that he wants to fight. Not too many fighters at that weight would have gone in and taken those shots from Munguia without showing any effect whatsoever.
Well, you